Good morning. Oh, good morning. Okay, great. I have a question for you. And no, it's not a question about whether you prefer to eat sugar or salt on your grits, because there's only one logical answer for that: salt. Amen. All right. It's a more profound question. Cheese will work too. It's a more profound question. Do you think that you're living and operating in your purpose right now? Most people respond to this question with what I like to call hopeful confusion. They're either one of a few people. Either one, they don't know and they don't care. Two, they're waiting on a sign to show them what their purpose is. Or maybe there's someone that's doing something that they hope is purpose. Or maybe you're part of the 25% of people that feel like they are moving and operating in their purpose right now in this moment. Because according to the New York Times study, only 25% of the people in this world feel like they're moving and operating in purpose. For the other 75% of the people in this room, I want to share with you today 3 things that I asked myself when I found myself moving and shifting into purpose. And more importantly, today, I'd like to share with you where I found it. But first, we have to go back to September the 22nd, 2018. Do you remember where you were on this day? Probably not, but I do. I was working part-time at a car dealership in the cashier department, and I remember that my boss was being a complete jerk at the moment. And I had decided that I had had enough, and so I quit. Now, while I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, I had an idea because I had a background of working in radio for about 14 plus years. I had been running an open mic for several years, and I was managing talent. And I had always known that I wanted to work for myself, but I just didn't trust that I would be able to do it. I was scared that I would fail, and I didn't know if I had what it took, right? But there was an even bigger question: what would I do? So we come back to this moment, and I asked myself 3 questions. I said, 1, what do I do well? 2, what do I love doing? And 3, what do people come to me for? And somewhere in the midst of that, I found myself landing on being a brand consultant. Now, don't get excited. I saw your face perk up there. That's not my purpose, right? That wasn't exactly the purpose, but it was the vehicle that led me to purpose. And I'll tell you why. Let me explain. So here's what happened. I started working with small business owners, entrepreneurs, and I started seeing them rapidly. Within 2 years, I saw more than almost about 200 entrepreneurs. So they started coming rather rapidly because of the reputation that I had built. And I was helping them with their branding, and I would ask very introspective questions because I really wanted to connect them to their marketing and their branding in a way that felt authentic. But what I discovered was something much more valuable than authenticity. I found that I kept connecting my entrepreneurs to purpose. We would go back into their past and then find something that would directly connect them to the work that they were doing. So here's what I discovered. Almost 100%, I would dare to say 98 to 99% of the entrepreneurs that I saw, or the small business owners that I worked with, we discovered 2 things. 1, they were either giving us something that they had in abundance as a child through the work that they were doing, or either they were giving us something that they were lacking and missing as a kid, somewhere in their adolescence, through the work that they were doing. Let's use Chick-fil-A as an example. Now, this is a callback, okay, like the grits. Does anyone know? Now, if you don't know what Chick-fil-A is a chicken restaurant that sells overpriced chicken everything, okay? All right? And sauce. And they're very nice and kind and very favorable with the sauce. Now, what do you think Chick-fil-A's vision statement is? Eat more chicken. Absolutely not. But that's a good guess. The most common guess, actually. Something with religion or spirituality, because you feel Jesus all in the chicken, don't you? Chick-fil-A's mission statement is, she's very close, to glorify God by having a positive influence or impact on anyone that encounters Chick-fil-A. And they chose to sell chicken to give people this feeling. So what does that mean? The way you guys and the way this room shift, I want to do an altar call, but I'm going to tell you what it means instead. What it means is that what you do and why you do it aren't always the same thing. In fact, sometimes what you do can just serve as a vehicle for purpose. I want to use one of my clients as an example to drill this home a little more. For the sake of this talk, we'll call her Nicole. And Nicole came to me as a former educator, and she was a real estate agent that was looking to open a brokerage. And when she came to me in one of our sessions, I asked her, I said, Nicole, tell me about your oldest childhood memory. And Nicole went back to a time where her dad was getting ready to move them to Atlanta from Mississippi. And so he was getting ready to go forward to Atlanta. He went there to make a way, and they were supposed to follow him to Atlanta. Well, something went wrong. He ended up coming back, and they ended up not moving. But instead of moving there, they ended up moving from their house to an apartment. And one day, Nicole and her sister were playing around and in one of the rooms, and her sister looked at her and said, I think we're poor. And Nicole came back to the moment in the session, and she said, I think I just feel like home ownership is the foundation for building a good family. And it was in that moment that I got chills, and I thought, well, we've discovered your purpose specifically that's personal to you for why you want to put people in homes. Psychologists define purpose as intentionally moving towards a long-term goal that is both personally meaningful to you and also having a positive impact on this world. So I want to ask you to ask yourself right now in this moment, what is your oldest childhood memory? And then also, what is the impact that you want to have in this world? I bet you're wondering by now what my oldest childhood memory is. And if you're not, I'm going to tell you anyway. While this memory in particular may not be the oldest, it's definitely the most impactful for me. And I can remember being between the ages of 6 to 8 years old. And I remember standing in my grandmother's living room, which was also my living room because that's where I grew up. And I remember looking at my aunt in the dining room. And I remember she was glaring at me from the dining room because I remember being very aware at that age that my aunt just did not care for me. And it wasn't because I was a bad kid or bratty or spoiled. I mean, that's up for debate, but I was a pretty good kid. But it was because my aunt felt that I thought I was better than her children. And more than that, she thought her mother, which was my grandmother, thought that I was her favorite of the grandkids. And so I can remember that none of those things were true for me. But what I do know to be true in that moment was that all I wanted to do was play with my cousins. And I remember the divide that it would cause between my cousins and that some of that residue still remains relevant to this day. I remember growing up throughout high school and junior high, and I remember making it very intentional to, when I had friends and people in my circle, that I would always want them to know that I didn't think I was better than them. And so I did that by way of making people feel very comfortable around me, very safe, very seen. They would tell me that all the time, boyfriends, friends. I feel so comfortable. I feel like I can tell you anything. And then even in the work that I do, when I started working with my entrepreneurs or my business owners in our sessions, a lot of them separately would describe one of our sessions as feeling like the therapy that they didn't know they needed. And sometimes in a branding and marketing session, they would be in tears. And now here I stand before you in a pivot from branding and marketing into what I feel like is purpose, because I couldn't run from the fact that I feel like my purpose is to help people feel safe, seen, and supported so they don't feel ashamed about where they are in life, so that they can grow and be the best versions of themselves, both professionally and personally. And so I run a nonprofit organization called Succeed and Elevate that helps small business owners to do just that. And we create communities and development where they feel safe, seen, and supported, and we try to eliminate shame and burnout so that they can grow and be the best versions of themselves. It turns out my purpose was with me all along. I just needed to go back into the past to bring it back to the future. Any 80 babies in here, Back to the Future watchers? Okay, great. Undoubtedly, the 80s babies in the room are better than everybody else. Okay, undoubtedly, just in this moment. Just in this moment. I hope listening to my journey has brought you closer to your purpose. And if it has, I want you to buckle up. Because in the words of Doc from Back to the Future, where we're going, we don't need roads. And I'll just add to that, all we need is a little direction and a lot of intention. Thank you.